We spent 6 days together at the Tip Top Lodge, just the two of us. Tourist season was over, and there was no boats on the river, and the wilderness seemed to withdraw into a great permanent stillness. Over those 6 days, Elroy Birtle and I took most of our meals together. In the morning, we sometimes went out on long hikes in the woods, and at night we played Scrabble or listened to records or sat reading in front of the big stone fireplace. At times I felt the awkwardness of an intruder, but Elroy accepted me into his quiet routine without fuss or ceremony. He took my presence for granted, the same way he might have sheltered a stray cat. No wasted sighs or pity, and there was never any talk about it. Just the opposite. What I remember more than anything is the man's willful, almost ferocious silence. In all that time together, all those hours, he never asked the obvious questions. Why was I there? Why alone? Why so preoccupied? If Elroy was curious about any of this, he was careful never to put it into words. My hunch, though, is that he already knew. At least the basics. After all, it was 1968, and guys were burning draft cards, and Canada was just a boat ride away. Elroy Birtle was no hick. His bedroom, I remember, was cluttered with books and newspapers. He killed me at the Scrabble game, barely concentrating, and on those occasions when speech was necessary, he had a way of compressing large thoughts into small, cryptic packets of language. One evening, just at sunset, he pointed up at an owl circling over the violet-lighted forest to the west. "Hey, O'Brien," he said, "there's Jesus." The man was sharp. He didn't miss much. Those razor eyes. Now and then he'd catch me staring out at the river and at the far shore, and I could almost hear the tumblers clicking in his head. Maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt it. One thing for certain, he knew I was in desperate trouble, and he knew I couldn't talk about it. The wrong word, or even the right word, and I would have disappeared. I was wired and jittery. My skin felt too tight. After supper one evening I vomited and went back to my cabin and lay down for a few moments of the afternoon. And then vomited again. Another time in the middle of the afternoon I began sweating and couldn't shut it off. I went through whole days feeling dizzy with sorrow. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't lie still. At night I'd toss around in bed, half awake, half dreaming, imagining how I'd sneak down to the beach and quietly push one of the old man's boat out in the river and start paddling my way toward Canada. There were times when I thought I'd gone off the psychic edge. I couldn't tell up from down. I was just falling. And late in the night I lie there watching weird pictures spin through my head, getting chased by the border patrol, helicopters and searchlights and barking dogs. I'd be crashing through the woods. I'd be down on my hands and knees, people shouting out my name, the law closing in on all sides, my hometown draft board and FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It all seemed crazy and impossible. 21 years old, an ordinary kid with all the ordinary dreams and ambitions, and all I was to live the life I was born, a mainstream life. I loved baseball and hamburgers and cherry cokes, and now I was off to the margins of exile, leaving my country forever, and it seemed so impossible and terrible and sad. I'm not sure how I made it through those 6 days. Most of it I can't remember. On 2 or 3 afternoons, to pass some time, I've helped Elroy get the place ready for winter, sweeping down the cabins and hauling in the boats, little chores that kept my body moving. The days were cool and bright, the nights were very dark. One morning, the old man showed me how to split and stack firewood, and for several hours we just worked in silence out beside his house. At one point, I remember Elroy put down his maul and looked at me for a long time, his lips drawn as if framing a difficult question. But then he shook his head and went back to work. The man's self-control was amazing. He never pried. He never put me in a position that required lies or denials. To an extent, I suppose his reticence was typical of the part of Minnesota, where privacy still held value, and even if I'd been walking around with some horrible deformity, 4 arms and 3 heads, I'm sure the old man would have talked about everything except those extra arms and heads. Simple politeness was part of it. But even more than that, I think the man understood that words were insufficient. The problem had gone beyond discussion. During the long summer, I'd been over and over the various arguments, all the pros and cons, and it was no longer a question that could be decided by an act of pure reason. Intellect had come up against emotion. My conscience told me to run, but some irrational and powerful force was resisting like a weight pushing me toward war. When it came down stupidly was a sense of shame. Hot, stupid shame. I did not want people to think badly of me. Not my parents, not my brother and sister, not even the folks down at the Cobbler Cafe. I was ashamed to be there at the Tip Top Lodge. I was ashamed of my conscience, ashamed to be doing the right thing.